Good morning. Today we'll discuss cluster analysis, basic concepts and methods. First we will see the basic concept, then we'll go for partitioning methods. The basic concept, we'll see what do you mean by cluster, what are all the applications of a cluster, how the cluster is used as a tool, then how can we evaluate the cluster quality, and what are the considerations for clustering concept, and what are the quality measurements of cluster analysis. Then some of the major clustering approaches will be listed. Then we'll go to partitioning methods. Now we'll try to define cluster. What is cluster analysis? Cluster, it is nothing but it's a collection of data objects. There we have similar as well as dissimilar. If it is similar data object, it means it is related objects will be put together in a single group. And dissimilar means it is unrelated or data objects. It will be defined as other groups. Cluster analysis, exactly what we are going to do, clustering data objects or data segmentations. Here exactly we are doing finding similarities between data according to the characteristics found in the data and grouping similar data objects into cluster. This is what we are going to do in cluster analysis. And cluster analysis is a unsupervised learning. Why? Because here there is no predefined classes. And there are some typical applications for unsupervised. As a standalone tool to get insight into data distributions. Here means the cluster concept will act as a standalone tool to get insight into the data distribution. And it is a pre-processing step for the other algorithms. The cluster concept is used as a pre-processing step for other algorithms. And where we are applying exactly the clustering concept. So we have different field. In biology field, we are using this clustering concept, and it is like grouping classes, order, phylum, family, genes and species. When you go for information retrieval, there we have a number of documents. To collect relevant documents, we are using clustering concept. It's a document clustering. Land use, identification of areas of similar land use and earth observation database. When you find a place, there if you want to have a similar places, so to identify the similar places, similar areas, we are using cluster concept. Then marketing, help marketers discover distinct groups in their customer base, and then use this knowledge to develop targeted marketing programs. Once if you find out different groups of customer, then we will apply the marketing strategies to develop targeted marketing programs. And city planning, identifying groups of houses according to the house type, value and the geographical locations. So in city planning, we will have number of houses, different type, different value for different people in different geographical locations. So to identify all these, we are applying clustering concept. And earthquake studies, observed earthquake epicenters should be clustered along continent faults. And climate, understanding earth climate, that means find patterns of atmospheric and oceans. Then economic science, it is a market research. So these are all the different fields there we are using clustering concept. And clustering as a pre-processing tool. So we told you, we already discussed, the clustering will be acting as a pre-processing tool for some other algorithms. See, for example, it will act as a summarization tool, means pre-processing for regression or principal component analysis, classifications and association analysis. So for these process, This clustering will be used as a summarization tool. And compressions, image processing, vector quantizations. In image processing for vector quantizations, we are using clustering. And finding k nearest neighbors, localizing search to one or small number of clusters, we are using clustering approaches. And outlier detections. Outlier are often viewed as those far away from any clusters. When you group the data points, there will be some of the data points which will be far away from the group. So to identify those data points, we will use cluster. And how to evaluate the quality of the cluster. So what is good clustering? So a good clustering method will produce high quality clusters. That means high intra-class similarity. It means cohesive within cluster. So within the cluster you have number of data points. So within the number of in between number of data points, you need to have cohesive. That must be high. A low intra-class similarity. That means in between the cluster you need to have space, that is a distinctive. That is a distinctive. The quality of the clustering methods depends on similarity measure used by the method. We have number of similarity measures. So what type of similarity measure we are going to use? Okay, based on that, the quality of the clustering will be evaluated. Its implementation, how we are going to implement this clustering, and its ability to discover some or all of the hidden patterns. And what do you mean by similarity and dissimilarity metrics? Similarity is expressed in terms of distance functions, typically as a metric. The definitions of distance functions are usually they are different for interval scaled, Boolean, categorical, ordinal ratio, and vector variables. This is a very important thing. And weights should be associated with different variables based on applications and data semantics. So we have number of data points. Each and every data point will be associated with some weight. So based on the weight, this data points will be identified and it will be clustered. Then quality of clustering. There is usually a separate quality functions that measures the goodness of the cluster. Okay, for each and every clustering process, there is one separate functions which will help you to evaluate the quality of the cluster. It is hard to define similar enough or good enough. Then consideration for cluster analysis. So there are some consideration which need to be considered when you do cluster analysis, the data points. Here, partitioning criteria, separation of clusters, similarity measures, and clustering space. In partitioning measures, the single level versus higher level hierarchical partitioning. Often, multi-level hierarchical partitioning is desirable. Okay. Here we have a single level or multi-level. That means hierarchical partitioning. There you always will prefer multi-level hierarchical partitioning. And separation of clusters exclusive, and that is example, one customer belongs to only one region versus non-exclusive in the sense one document may belong to more than one classes. The separation of clusters, how the clusters can be separated. And similarity measures, distance based and connectivity based. How the similarity can be measured. One is distance based, another one is connectivity based. In case of distance based, you have Euclidean distance, road network, vector. When you go for connectivity based, then you can consider density or contiguity. Clustering space, full space or subspace. Okay, the clustering space will be categorized based on full space or subspace. Full space in the sense often when low dimensional, subspace often in high dimensional clustering. So when you cluster again and again, then you will get what high dimensional clusterings. And what are the requirements and challenges of cluster analysis? Here, the scalability is one of the very important requirements. Clustering all the data instead of only on samples. It is scalability. Okay. Then when we have more number of data, we need to cluster all the data instead of going for only sampling, only the samples. And ability to deal with the different types of attributes. Okay. There are numerical, binary, categorical, ordinal, link, and mixture of these. Okay. And the other one is constraint based clustering. One of the important requirements. Constraint based clustering. So when we cluster the data points, there we need to have some constraints. The user may give inputs on constraints. Okay. So according to the user input, the clusters can be formed. Or use domain knowledge to determine input parameters. So by using domain knowledge also we can determine the clusters. Interpretability and usability, based on interpretability as well as usability. The others are discovery of clusters with arbitrary shape, okay, and ability to deal with the noise data. Okay. These are all the challenges. And incremental clustering and insensitivity to input order. Then high dimensionality. There are some major clustering approaches. They are all. One is partitioning approach, then hierarchical approach, density based approach, grid based approach. Okay. So, and we have some other approaches also. So all these approaches we will try to discuss in the upcoming lectures. Partitioning approach in the sense construct various partitions and then evaluate them by some criterions. Okay. Example, minimizing the sum of square errors. Typical methods are k-means, k-medoids, and clarins. And hierarchical approach in the sense create a hierarchical decomposition of the set of data, that means objects, using some criteria. For this method, the typical methods are Diana, Agnes, Bridge, and Cambrian. The next one is density based approach. Here we are completely dependent on the density of the cluster. It is based on the connectivity and density functions. Typical methods are DBS, ACN, optics, DENTRU. Then grid based approach. So grid based approach based on multi-level granularity structures. So examples given: STING, wave cluster, and QQ. There are some other approaches also. One is model based and frequent pattern based, user guided or constraint based, and link based clusterings. The model based in the sense a model is hypothesized for each of the clusters and try to find the best fit of that model to each other. So there are some methods we are given over here. And frequent pattern based is nothing but based on the analysis of frequent patterns. So how we are going to cluster? We have different approaches. Frequent pattern based is one of the clustering approaches. Based on the frequent pattern, the data points will be clustered. And based on the user guide or constraints, the cluster will be formed. Clustering by considering user specified or application specified constraints. Typical methods COD and constraint clustering. And link based clustering. Objects are often linked together in various ways. Massive links can be used to cluster objects, SIMRAN, link close. See, these are all the basis of clustering. So the next lecture we will see the partitioning methods. Thank you.